So I'm going to start out with just a really brief summary of where we are with pinnipeds in Southern California waters to give you some context. These four species you generally probably, unless you're out on the Channel Islands, you really won't see. The harbor seals, of course, a couple of spots, including now famous Children's Cove in La Jolla, but difficult to see in most places. And their abundance has been increasing in California for some time, since just a few dozen to a couple hundred in the California waters in the 1920s and 30s, and there are probably about 3,000, 4,000 on the Channel Islands, maybe 5,000 in Southern California Bight today. Northern fur seal is a small colony at San Miguel Island. Appeared in the 60s, and it's been growing steadily, but still fairly small. But a colony there at Adams Cove on Point Bennett at the west end of San Miguel and offshore at Castle Rock. Stellar sea lions used to breed here in the early part of the 20th century and vanished, except for occasional strays, including one that's been seen at Long Beach this last week. So they're still around occasionally, but no breeding for quite some time. And Guadalupe fur seals, virtually extinguished in the late 1800s, believed extinct until about the 1950s, late 1940s, when some were discovered at Guadalupe, and they recolonized some other islands in Mexico, and there have been a few pups now born in California at San Miguel and San Nicolas, but pretty uncommon except for some males and a few females that show up. So those are the ones you probably won't see. Elephant seals you probably won't encounter either unless you're up in Central California, or if you're out on the Channel Islands. But a pretty remarkable story for this species. Another one that was presumed extinct, in fact, attempts to extinguish it in the late 1800s. And they started showing up, but they weren't. There were some that were surviving at sea, and they started showing up again in California waters in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, and then a few pups born at San Miguel and San Nicolas Island, late 1940s, and since then continued increases. So if you're out in the Channel Islands, particularly now, peak of the breeding season, there are thousands of animals on the beaches at San Nicolas, San Miguel, and Santa Rosa Islands, and a few at a couple of the others. And they're still increasing today. There are about 30 to 40,000 pups born now for a population of maybe even getting close to about 200,000, attributed to just California, which is the primary colonies at San Nicolas, San Miguel, and Santa Rosa Islands these days. California sea lions, we're going to hear a little bit about them. They're probably the most obvious because they're also coastal, but the colonies on San Nicolas and San Miguel are the largest in the species range. Again, very uncommon in the mid part of the 1900s, a few thousand maybe in California waters, and they've been increasing at steady high rates with minor exceptions during El Nino periods. And Sharon will tell us a little bit about some disease effects and some oceanographic changes and variability that affects birds. But they're steadily increasing too, and the primary colonies of the world are at San Miguel and San Nicolas Islands, and still increasing. And then California sea otters, and Brian Hatfield's going to tell us what's been happening with sea otters in Southern California waters. So that's kind of a really brief context. We're going to go through a series of 5 presentations, and we'll hold questions until the end. And I hope that we can, by being brief in each one of these presentations, get you to think about questions you might have, or provoke some questions or discussion. And we'll hold all the questions or comments till the panel. And this is a list of the presenters. Claudia Hernandez is going to describe to us and tell us what's been happening with pinnipeds in Mexican waters. Sharon's going to talk, Sharon Moline will talk a bit about San Miguel Island colony and some variation in survival due to their long-term, found from their long-term studies, and a bit about disease. And then Mark Lowry, long-term studies on diet of California sea lions, and perhaps what's been fueling the population increases. And Steve Jeffries will tell us a bit about what's happening in Washington State waters, where there are migrations of particularly subadult and adult male California sea lions that live down here partly during the summer and then leave and travel up the coast during fall and winter and appear there. And then Brian Hatfield will describe what's happening with California sea otters with the experimental colony that was established at San Nicolas Island in the 1980s. And what's been happening with that and the status of that, legal status of that colony, and perhaps a bit about what's happening in Central California related to the changes in Southern California. So the first speaker is Claudia Hernandez, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Mexican pinnipeds.